So now it's time for our final panel session, chaired by SVG Europe's editor Will Strauss and our guests from Sky Sports and NEP. And don't forget, if you have any questions, please put them on chat or email us via questions@sportsvideo.org and we will try to get as many as we can. So, over to you, Will.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the third and final panel session of Football Summit 2020. Thanks for staying with us. My name is Will Strauss. I'm one of the editors here at SVG Europe. This session is called Flying High, inside the restart of the Premier League on Sky Sports. As the title suggests, we're going to delve deep into what has been done in the last few weeks and months to get coverage of the Premier League back on air in the UK. As you know, the live action returned last night after a 100-day hiatus caused, of course, by the coronavirus pandemic and the lockdown. Now, in the UK, Sky Sports has the lion's share of the remaining matches, 62 out of the last 90, in fact, and some of those were made free to air. Last night, Sky had the first two matches of Project Restart, Aston Villa versus Sheffield United and Manchester City versus Arsenal. I'm here today with four of the people that made those and future behind closed doors broadcasts possible. With me is Laurence Cawsey, who's a Senior Director for Sky Sports Football. He's been instrumental in planning both matches last night and all the remaining fixtures. He directed the City-Arsenal game yesterday. Jena Mihalovic is the Technical Operations Projects Lead for Sky Sports. She's been a key part of creating the remote production workflows that will be used for the rest of the season and possibly beyond. Kevin Ramsey is Director of Studios for Sky Production Services. His role in ensuring staff safety has been vital throughout this process. And John Turnbull, Deputy Managing Director of NEP UK Broadcast Services, obviously a key partner for these broadcasts with Sky. And John was present at the Aston Villa game last night. Welcome to you all.
Hi.
Now, as we know, when you've had a long layoff, things don't always go to plan. You can just ask David Luiz that. But off the pitch last night, things seemed to go pretty smoothly. Let's start with you, Laurence, if we may. To put it bluntly, how was last night for you? And what was it like directing a Premier League game remotely and with no fans in the stadium?
Yeah, hi, Will. So, yeah, it was a very interesting experience. There's quite a lot of pressure on the whole team at Sky last night, directing Premier League football remotely. In the way that we did it was just one of the many things that Sky were doing for the first time last night. And the technical team and the planning team had done an amazing job in making us able to deliver everything we managed. What was it like directing it? So being away from the ground has its challenges. There's quite a lot to look at last night, with a lot changing around the grounds in terms of interview positions, camera positions, various things on the ground that Man City had done to try and improve the in-stadium experience. And as directors, you're sort of used to walking around before the game and seeing all of this, but that obviously isn't possible when you're remote. You're relying on doing it through camera lenses and the eyes of other people there. So it was the first time I directed a game with no fans, and I'd say coming away from yesterday, I had a real appreciation of how important stadium fans are to the TV viewing experience. So we rely as directors quite a lot on emotional shots of players in our storytelling, and these shots don't seem to happen as much with no fans in the stadium, because the players don't sort of have the fans to feed off. So, and it's not just sort of on screen. Normally when you're at a ground, like to say Chelsea for an example that springs to mind, you'll hear the crowd noise like reverberate through the walls of the trucks as they're so loud, and that sort of emits an energy into yourself and your crew. So I chose to listen last night with the natural audio, the natural stadium audio, as opposed to the augmented audio option that Sky was offering. And it was a challenge to sort of, because the stadium was quite flat, it was a challenge to keep your energy up and try and keep the energy levels of the crew up as well. So, there's always a few things that I think I could have done better with last night. And being a big Arsenal fan, it was pretty disappointing as well. But the one massive benefit, just from a personal point of view, is the benefit of remote production is being able to be home within 10 minutes of finishing my shift instead of a 4-hour drive down the M6.
Absolutely, 4 hours when you've just lost 3-0 is awful.
Yeah, exactly.
But you mentioned the remote production, and you were involved in the planning process for the remaining games. So, what problems did you have to solve, and how did you solve them?
Yeah, so I've been involved over quite a wide variety of things. Due to the complexity of the technical setup, we tried to reduce the risk of technical error by standardising all our camera plans for every Premier League ground, for example. So we've got a handful of directors at Sky who work on the Premier League, and all of us would normally have slightly different camera plans, camera positions, camera numberings that we like using. So we've made that really simple. Worked on the working practices around us producing back-to-back games at Sky, which is fairly complex. Running 2 world feeds simultaneously from Sky is something we haven't done before, even with the EFL. I suppose the major challenge has been around how we keep the quality of our coverage up and to the highest level that we aspire to at Sky, while sort of maintaining all the health and safety protocols which are in place, which I'm sure Kev and John will go into a bit more. But in that sense as well, it's sort of been vitally important in all the planning meetings we've had that we sort of think about every single person's role on the team and how their roles were impacted by new safety measures, and just make sure that each person has what they had to perform their jobs, basically. But I think strangely my role sort of seemed to be aimed towards a bit more problem finding. So luckily for me, like most of the problems we found were technical, and we've had Jena leading the team, and Gordon Roxburgh leading from a technical perspective, and a great team of technical people at Sky who sort of always seem to manage to find a solution to the problems that we've been facing the last few weeks.
Thanks very much. Jena, thanks for joining us. You were instrumental, according to my introduction, with the when it comes to the remote production. So tell us, what have you had to put in place in preparation for yesterday's games, but for also the rest of the Premier League games to come, both in the studio but also in the stadiums?
So the first thing that we led with was health and safety. And we always want people to be safe, but this is a very unique situation, having people come back and working 2 meters apart. Everybody who's worked in television knows we like to be together. We lean on each other, and we work in very dense spaces. So the first thing we had to do was figure out a way to give everybody, as Lauren said, specifically what each person needed to do their job in a safe way. So that kind of meant deconstructing where we normally work. So we created 4 separate graphics hubs so that our graphics operators and stats people can operate in a safe place outside of the gallery. We looked at ways to limit the number of people on site and limit the number of people at Sky so that everybody can be kept safe. And John could speak about that from the stadium side. So in addition to the graphics hubs, our replay rooms, EVS operators like to work shoulder to shoulder. It's very hard to separate people out. So we built an entire new replay area for them to work still side by side, just a little bit further than they'd like to be. We also pulled our lighting directors outside of the gallery as well and built them another station in a safe place at Sky. So it was really just unpacking our usual workspaces in a safe way.
Thanks very much. You've mentioned Kevin. I'll bring Kevin now again. Thank you for joining us, Kevin. What changes have you had to make? And I guess importantly, is there anything that still needs to be ironed out?
Yeah, I guess, well, first of all, I need to change teams after the Arsenal result last night. That still breaks my heart.
Likewise.
Yeah. I mean, it goes without saying that, Sky's production teams have incredibly high standards and expectations in terms of the work they produce, essentially. And as a department that supplies both facilities and operational crews for Sky Sports, it can be both incredibly rewarding working side by side. Sky Sports are busy pushing the boundaries. But of course, there's a flip side to that, and that kind of mainly lies in the amount of graft it takes to support their visions sometimes, and especially at this time when there were so many logistical obstacles in our way. And we clearly didn't want to be the weak link that undermined what went to air, essentially. So what was really important for us was to work very, very closely with our Sky Sports counterparts and very, very collaboratively, really, to find high quality solutions. And as Jena alluded to without compromising the safety of our people.
I was just going to bring in John because I'm hoping he is not an Arsenal fan as well, because this will be a very miserable panel if he is. But I mean, we've touched on the situation in the grounds. I mean, you were at the Villa game. Did it feel different?
It does, as Laurence said. The crowd plays such a big part in sport. That sort of, you feed off that, and that feeling that you get when you see the enjoyment that people are getting in a stadium and at home, is quite powerful. I think from a technical point of view, you are very focused on the delivery. So sometimes you don't even know what the score is. So you're sometimes looking at a game and just checking that everything's hitting air properly, and that's what you worry about. But there is definitely, the fans have always been a big part of football and any live sporting event. I think it does highlight that, and hopefully in the near future we can welcome people back to stadiums.
I guess not knowing the score was very handy for Laurence and Kevin last night. I'll move on. I'm not a Spurs fan, don't worry. Jena, could we come back to you actually? Sky's had quite a big refurb to prepare for more live remote production. I wonder if you could fill us in a bit about exactly what's happened and what's been put in place.
So remote production's been at Sky, I think about 5 years now or so. We've touched on it with previous productions. But last year, we made a commitment to take EFL remote. So with that, we did transform a gallery. We added the connectivity here. We worked with NEP Connect, getting connectivity at all of the grounds, which is always a big issue. I think one thing we may all notice right now with no fans, it is much easier to connect and talk on our cell phones and use Wi-Fi. So fans can be quite data hungry at the stadiums. So we worked on that, and we got about 50 games in with EFL, and I think that has truly prepared us for slipping into Premier League. I don't think we could have done what we've done as easily without the experience that we had doing that EFL day in and day out and learning from that each time we went. And I think that was really important for us. And so it was quite easy. I wouldn't say it's easy, but it was an easy decision for us to keep our people safe by going to remote production and moving Premier League into the gallery that we created for EFL, and then moving EFL with a slightly reduced spec into another gallery, adding the remote connectivity that we needed there, which is really underlying physical changes. The gallery still looks the same and acts the same to the production staff, which is a great comfort and also helps with transitioning. And I mean, the EFL team have been fantastic. I don't think we give them enough credit. We completely changed their workflow last year, and now this year we said, and now we're changing you again. And they were just like, no problem, and they're on tonight.
Fantastic. Can you see, Jena? Can you see this becoming more of the norm, do you think?
I think it's hard to say for any of us what's going to be normal anymore. But remote production for Sky anyway has always been, it's always been discussed when we're talking about what can we do best. And a lot of that is centered around our carbon neutral policy that we're going for. So we're always looking for ways where we can improve in the environment, and whether that's less people traveling in their cars, having to drive, 500 miles round trip, whether that's adding, to the waste with the catering on site and things like that. We take all of that into consideration when we talk about remote production. And now it's gone, under these COVID guidelines that we're working under, certainly not normal for any of us. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of this and what stays. But I think we're really well prepared for it, and it'll always be in the discussion for how can we do this in the best way.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I've got lots of questions from the audience, so I'm going to jump into some of those if that's okay. Serendipitous nature of this means I'm going with the first one. Kevin, hundreds of freelancers you work with at Sky Production Services for Premier League coverage, but also for other sports. Will they have the same roles, or will their roles change? But also this question carries on to, will there be a lot less jobs potentially? And if so, what sort of percentage less are we looking at as far as the sports productions are concerned?
Sure. So in terms of volumes of jobs, I don't see that there's necessarily going to be a change. In fact, there are obviously two ways to look at this, and it's very easy to focus on the negative in terms of the limitations. But in terms of working in new ways, it's something that's always been on our roadmap at Sky and in studios particularly, it forms part of the core of some of our real key goals. So in some respects, it's been a bonus in terms of it's forced us to work differently rather than us perhaps taking a more measured approach without this in place. So I think the positives are that it probably opens up avenues and entry points for people wanting to get into the industry, essentially. So, yes, I believe there will be some change in roles and responsibilities, something that we should encourage. The industry moves on regardless anyway. And I think from a perspective of anybody wanting to either get in or continue to work in this industry, it's really important they kind of embrace the situation and the opportunity that this scenario provides, essentially.
Thanks very much. It certainly did, yeah. If you can hear buzzing, that's because there's more questions coming in. We're very lucky in that respect. Laurence, I think you may have touched on this before, but if not, is it possible to stay in touch with the game if you're not on site? Would you this is a good one. Would you prefer to be directing in the stadium or do it remotely? No pressure.
Would I prefer? Do you know what? It's a really good question actually, because you can't put a price on actually going to the ground and getting a feel of being actually like really part of the event and being there in the stadium and being close to it. So if I had to choose one, I would say being at the ground. For me, ideally, it would be being at someone like Chelsea or Arsenal or someone like that that's close, where it doesn't have to involve the masses of travel that you have to do with it. In terms of staying in touch, yeah, I mean, all you lose out on mainly is face-to-face contact with people, but that plays quite a big part when you're directing, certainly, because you'll go and have face-to-face conversations with all the camera operators or Steadicam operators about shots, ball managers, and this communication is easy, and it's a lot more challenging in a remote environment, and that's certainly something we sort of got to keep improving on, really.
Thank you very much. Question for John. He's working out well, one each so far. Would you have changed anything from last night? Is there anything you might have done better, or anything you might amend for the future?
I think with, we'll be talking about this all over the weekend. I think, where we look at each match, each one presents a different set of challenges. Mm-hmm. So, after each game, as a team, we'll review that, see what works, what hasn't worked. But I think, the positive thing is the feedback we're getting from people is the overall approach has worked. People are, back covering live sport, and live sport is back on the television. So the other things that we can do, we'll continue to fine tune, continue to learn, and then adapt the processes to meet that.
It was quite, just jump in, it was quite an interesting sort of feeling last night as we came off air, because it was sort of like a big well done, we've all done this, and then you sort of actually, when you think about it, we got another 62 Premier League games to do in the space of 39 days and 45 EFL games as well on top of that. So we're going to learn a lot over the next few weeks, I think.
You've only got 60 left, actually. You've done 2. It's only 60 more to go, if that makes you feel any better. Here's a really interesting question. I think it's probably for Kevin. Do you need to have additional crew and personnel available on a match day? I'm guessing in case somebody doesn't get let in because they have failed whatever tests they have to go through before they enter the ground. So do you need backup people available?
At the moment, we've got the luxury of having reduced crews working at the moment. So by default, we have some people on standby. I mean, how that pans out as more and more productions get stood up, we'll have to cross that bridge. But at the moment, it's quite a nice luxury to have. And fingers crossed, we haven't had to drag anyone in kicking and screaming to bail us out yet.
Excellent. Jena, this one's for you. I think I very much doubt you're going to be able to give a coherent, not you couldn't give a coherent answer, but it's very hard to answer this question. Is there a difference in cost between remote production versus traditional production?
So actually, I mean, not going into, I don't know what we broke this down. It kind of evens out, honestly, in the cost wise, right? Because you need the infrastructure that you have at Sky. And yes, you're not now traveling people, but you still need the same people, and you still need the same time to set up. So it's almost apples to oranges. I wouldn't say that, in the long run, perhaps remote, will pan out. I haven't seen any numbers for what we've done previously, but I mean, for what we did for this was certainly not cheap.
Fair enough. Laurence, as far as social distancing is concerned, have roles changed? Director and vision mixer are specified here. This person asks whether has the role merged, for example, because of social distancing? Has the role changed and/or have any roles merged?
So few roles have got more difficult, I'd say. From the directing perspective, certainly on the Premier League, so we have two setups. We have one where we have setups where we remote out of Sky, which is how the Manchester City game was directed last night, and we have a truck solution, which is what John was involved with at Aston Villa yesterday. On site, so the game's on site in the Aston Villa game last night, the director vision mixes himself or herself, and they're sort of normally we're quite trained at doing it anyway, but it's fairly complicated when you start throwing in replays and replay lines and VAR incidents and stuff like that. At Sky, we've managed to have our directing panels, and 2 meters behind, we've networked out a vision mixing little sub desk that's able to remote into the main desk and fire off replays. I'm not quite certain how the technical thing works there, but so from that perspective, that's what's happened. Other roles sort of got more difficult. Floor managers, for example, and OBs, we rely on as directors like enormously to get us information about what's happening, what's going on down the tunnel and stuff like that. When teams are going to walk out, we don't have that anymore because we can't. They're restricted from going into those areas. I can imagine, John, for your team at Visions, it must have been quite challenging as well. Different aspects of not being able to go places or having to remain 2 meters in terms of rigging and stuff like that. So it's quite a big change for a lot of people.
Funnily enough, that was another question, and John, this is the last one, I'm afraid. It actually leads on very nicely from what Laurence just said. Levels of crewing at NEP and the way those crews work, how different is it?
Well, I mean, essentially, we're still doing a specification that requires a certain level of crewing, but what you have to do is building in the time. We've also had to look at the regional aspects of the crew because we want people to be local to the locations wherever possible. So that's something we've spent time on looking at. Actually operating on site, there are aspects where social distancing is very difficult for lifting heavy equipment, etc. So we've addressed that with procedures around PPE and everything else. So yeah, I don't think the crew levels have changed significantly, but I think that we've had to look at building more time into the rigs, certainly, and also working into remote locations, building time for the guys at the far end of the operation that they can properly line up and test with us on site. So those are the kind of things we've looked at.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Jena, John, Laurence, Kevin, thank you very much for joining me today and for answering these questions. That's been a brilliant insight into not just last night, but what will be happening for the remainder of the season. Thank you very much for your time. Back to you, Katerina, in the studio.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Will, and thank you to all the panelists. I think that's a really big deal, a really big topic, like what you said, what was said about the absence of live audiences. It means a whole part of the emotion you normally have during a game is missing. We all know that, and we all usually love that. And absolutely, health and safety going forwards is being transformed, and we will see and hear much more about this issue and how to manage it for sure. And good to hear that potentially we will keep jobs for our people, but that there will be a new challenge figuring out how work is differently being managed. So each match, that's what we take along, presents every team with new challenges and overall approaches are working, but fine-tuning processes and moving towards welcoming back live sport events. That's the main goal. And that brings us to the end of the match. You've heard the whistle, so we're finally, well, almost there. Not finally, we're almost there. It has been fantastic to see and hear how so many people are using special occasions like the lockdown to innovate and realize new ideas, strategies for fan engagement, new television experiences. Lots of challenges have been overcome, and long may this continue. So thank you, big thank you to everyone who was taking part of this today and who is giving up their time, and a special thank you to the team of Sky Germany. I hope you guys, everyone out there, enjoyed this event as much as I did, and it just remains for me to say thank you for your time and stay safe and goodbye.